Good morning, all, and welcome to this special sitting in tribute to the late Parnel Randolph Campbell, Commander of the Royal Victorian Order, Queen's Counsel. On behalf of my sisters, Justice Bayer, Justice Henry, Justice Tilak Singh, and on my own behalf, to the widow and the family of the late, and I'll take a liberty here, P.R. Campbell, I express the sincere and deep condolences of the court. In today's sitting, we will hear addresses from many persons who are far more qualified than I am to speak of the legal legacy of a local luminary who has meant so much to so many people. We have a packed program of speakers. I must also extend the apologies of the President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Justice Adrian Saunders, who had hoped to be here this morning, at least virtually, but was not been able to make it because the Caribbean Court of Justice has a matter which is scheduled for hearing this morning, and that court does not do adjournments. He has asked me to convey his sentiments in some words that he has written. And I can do no better than read to you verbatim what he has written and associate myself with those remarks. Justice Saunders said, "I would have loved to have been here physically, or at least virtually. I regret that the circumstances have conspired to prevent either, as my court had long scheduled an appeal for this morning, and at the CCJ we have no culture of adjournment. I am still, however, grateful for this opportunity, through His Lordship, to extend my deepest condolences to the bereaved children, siblings, other family members of Mr. Parnel R. Campbell, and of course to his widow Julie, my former classmate at the grammar school 6th form. I felt a keen sense of loss when I learned of his passing. St. Vincent and the Grenadines have lost a true patriot, a man who dedicated his life to the cause of the advancement of the people of this country and the nurturing of our democratic institutions. My first encounter with Mr. Campbell was in a classroom at the grammar school in the late 1960s. He was, for a brief period, one of my teachers in Form 3, or was it Form 4, shortly after his return to St. Vincent and the Grenadines from Canada. In those early years, he always appeared immaculately dressed, a trait that remained with him after a brief flirtation with dashikis. He was not our teacher for long, but I vividly recall him schooling us to mark, learn, and inwardly digest certain passages of literature we were studying at the time. It occurred to me, even then, that this was an exhortation that he must often have imposed on himself while studying in Canada. Those of us old enough will recall that this period, the late 60s, was a time of considerable social and political ferment. Television was just coming to the state, and so the vigorous civil rights struggles in the United States, the rise of the Black Power and Black consciousness movements, the assassinations of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Robert Kennedy, the unjust war being waged against the Vietnamese people, these were all captured in images being beamed to us Caribbean states that were just beginning to wrest themselves free from colonial rule. It was a heady mix that swept along many of us students led by progressive intellectuals, all anxious to make their contribution to bettering this country. P.R. Campbell was at the forefront of this movement, along with persons like the late Eddie Griffith and Kerwin Morris and Kenneth John, Arnhem Eustace, John Cato, and others. Selflessly, they organized themselves in various efforts to raise the consciousness of Vincentians. They were ridiculed, harassed, and denounced by the powers that be. But they persevered, and they did succeed in educating those who would listen. PR actually never ceased this educational mission. It was a task that he devoted himself to with unfailing dedication and consistency right down to the very end of his days. I next encountered Parnel at the Cave Hill Law Faculty of the University of the West Indies, where we both studied law. He was in the first batch of Caribbean-trained lawyers. This was at a time when every Caribbean student studying law at the University of the West Indies had to attend the faculty in Barbados. Some of the most brilliant young minds in the English-speaking Caribbean were there, along with a strong representation of Vincentian students. We Vincies took pride in the esteem in which PR was held by his peers. He was easily one of the most outstanding students, taking a leading part in every facet of campus life. Parnel proceeded to Cambridge to pursue a master's in law that metamorphosed into a doctorate. He would have obtained this with flying colors, except that in 1979 he was prevailed upon to interrupt his studies and return home so he could become more directly involved in the country's political and social life. General elections loomed, and his insight and abilities were desperately needed. In hindsight, it was an unfair request to make of him. He never got to complete the doctorate. But typically, when the request was made, he did not hesitate. And from that point until his death, he made a Herculean contribution to the development of this country as a long-serving Attorney General, as a Member of Parliament and of Cabinet, as an outstanding attorney at law, as an educator, and as a servant of the people. The features I most admired about him were his articulateness, his discipline, his organizational acumen, and his painstaking attention to microscopic detail, all undergirded by a supreme self-confidence. His superb oratory was always on display, but I first saw his organizational skills displayed in 1969 when, notwithstanding his differences with the then government, he accepted the responsibility of organizing a massive event at Victoria Park for all the school children in the island to mark our achievement of associated statehood. This organizational feat foreshadowed the preeminent role he would play in marshalling the troops of the New Democratic Party to victory after victory in the 1980s and 90s. His meticulous and flawless organization of the visit to these shores of Her Majesty the Queen in 1985 was so highly regarded by the palace that he was bestowed with an award reserved only for those who rendered distinguished personal service to the monarch. Such recognition by Britain did not dim his unflagging commitment to the principle of self-determination for the people of this country and of the region. He remained rightly convinced that Caribbean people were capable of determining their own destiny, and he worked unfailingly to promote that end. He supported our constitutional advance from associated statehood to independence. He championed the replacement of Her Majesty's Privy Council by a Caribbean Court of Justice. It is unfortunate that despite his efforts and those of others, he never lived to see this goal realized. It is not often that this little nation will produce a son or a daughter who is bright, disciplined, organized, committed to public service, and brimful of confidence. Such a man was Parnel R. Campbell. Yes, St. Vincent and Grenadines has lost one of our most talented sons. It may be very small comfort, Judy, but the grief that you, the children, and all the family members are experiencing, that grief is also shared by many of your compatriots. Someone once said, no one is actually dead until the ripples they have caused in the world die away. It will be a very long time before the ripples Parnel made are no more. I thank you. Those are the words of Justice Saunders. Two of my sisters, Justice Thom and Justice Bayer, are attending virtually, and they too may have some remarks that we wish to hear. But I will take the liberty of assuming their consent and invite at this stage the Prime Minister, Dr. the Right Honorable Ralph E. Gonsalves, the Prime Minister, to address us now. And that is because I understand that there are other duties which will demand his attention fairly shortly. Dr. Gonsalves.
I'm obliged, my Lord, ladies, the bench. I'm very honored to be here, and I'm very pleased, happy to have been invited, though this is a sad occasion, by the bar and the family, to say a few words about Parnel R. Campbell. My Lord, ladies, Justice Saunders has given a comprehensive review of Parnel's life and work, and I adopt all those words and call them my own, and to see if I can add some value to these proceedings. As we all know, that Parnel died on April the 19th, a few months shy of his 76th birthday. He was my friend, my colleague, for a while a competitor in politics, also a colleague in politics, a brother in the law and a sage advisor. Our relationship spanned over 62 years. I entered the grammar school, as you did in those days, in January. I did in January 1959. And PR was a year or two ahead of me. And over the years, I followed with profound admiration the development of this extraordinary individual who was possessed of abundant blessings. He was a scholar, a teacher, a Calypsonian. Who can forget? Buy your own cigarette. Political and cultural activist, political organizer and strategist, leader of men and women, distinguished parliamentarian, excellent lawyer, attorney general, constitutional and legal reformer, public educator on the law, a Christian gentleman of the spiritual Baptist faith. In fact, in the modern period, I don't think that there is anyone who has contributed more to the development of the spiritual Baptist faith than Parnel Campbell. He's a servant of the people, he's a wise elder, a philanthropist, very generous, and with the noblest forms and acts of solidarity, in that he gave not from the surplus that he didn't really have, but from the little he possessed. He was a wonderful father, a husband and family man. Imperfect like all of us. To borrow, amend from someone whose works he admired greatly, William Shakespeare. He was a pearl, not say greater than the tribe, but who enriched immensely our nation and our Caribbean civilization and our human family. St. Vincent and the Grenadines has lost a treasure in Parnel. His passing is an inestimable loss, made more grievous on account of our current perils of COVID-19, the volcanic eruptions and the looming hurricane season. We shall miss his counsel in the days and months ahead. We are grateful for his magnificent contributions as a servant of the people to nation building. And above all, we thank Almighty God for gifting him to us for over 75 years. Parnel was born in very humble circumstances, in Barley. And he told me on many occasions that it is to his grandmother that he owed a tremendous debt of gratitude for instilling in him a core of tried and tested values, grounded in sturdy rural experiences and Christian upbringing. These are the values that shaped his disciplined outlook on life, living, and production. He was taught the verities of hard and smart work, sound education and training, service to our fellow men and women, the generosity of spirit, the values of freedom and justice, democracy and activism, equality of all before the law and God, and love of country. These elemental virtues remained with him throughout his life. They were the blazing fires in him. I am not awaiting Parnel's death to speak good of him. Anyone who has read a book which I wrote in 2019 entitled The Political Economy of the Labor Movement, you would see the high esteem in which I held the work of Parnel. But it always touched me because I was very much involved in the struggles in the late 60s and 70s. Well, my whole life has been a struggle. But in those early days, a number of persons wouldn't understand how a young man of such immense promise, doing his PhD at one of the most prestigious universities in the world, having excelled at his degree in law and politics and got a first-class honors in law. He could have taken the path of a professor. He eschewed that. He could have taken the path of the bench. He didn't go there. And when his organization, the People's Democratic Movement, which was part of the umbrella United People's Movement, of which I was a member, when the PDM asked him to come home to run in Barley, in central Kingstown, central Leeward, sorry, he didn't hesitate. But what is interesting, on no occasion did he ever regret this monumental act of selflessness in service of his people and his nation. Now, I'm not going to speak too much about his political activism, which we heard from Justice Saunders and which we will hear from other speakers, I'm sure, today. But if anyone wants to know about his importance to the New Democratic Party, which he joined, he was not in the group which went first to the NDP in 1984. Some matters held him back. But he was eventually persuaded to join. And he contested the by-election after Eddie Griffith's death, so Central Kingstown in 1987. But if you read the tribute to Parnel in the Searchlight newspaper by Sir James, one of the things which will strike you is that Sir James credited Parnel's strategic thinking and planning and hard work for the party's clean sweep victory in the 1989 general election. Of course, at the time there, Sir James's leadership was quite strong. But I think it is instructive that the former leader of the party would give this high recognition to Parnel for his work in that regard. Over the years, we see innovative thinking from Parnel. Parnel had come to the conclusion that it was not practicable or possible to make revolution in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That you have to reform the political and economic and social structures. The only place he thought about a revolution is a revolution in the mind, in the thinking. And that has been central to his life, from his so-called Black Power days. That was the name given by his political opponents. That's not really what his thinking. Far more complex and subtle than that. And that is the position right up to his 990-something law and new programs. The young lawyers may not know this, but in the law books, look at the dates from 1987 to 1995. You will see the handiwork of the law reformer, this Parnel Campbell. And amidst the law reform, you will see the codification of laws. And when he demitted office in 1995 as Attorney General, he was up to that point the longest serving Attorney General in our country, eclipsed subsequently by Judith Jones-Morgan. And the family court, which we all now take for granted, the law was drafted by, taken to Parliament, and the family court was set up. That is part of PR's lasting legacy. A legacy for the fairness, the relation between men and women, particularly women, and for the protection of children. So every day, you go to the family court and appear before the president of the family court. Quietly in your heart, in your mind, say thanks to Parnel Campbell. Now, after he left active politics, he became involved in many issues of national and community importance. And among them, of course, work in the spiritual Baptist faith. He was chairman of the National Constitutional Review Commission and the presentation of the law new. He and I practiced before these courts, and I was very happy that a process which had begun before I became Prime Minister for the elevation of two persons to the inner bar. That process was completed afterwards. One of those persons declined for his name to go forward to the Governor General. And I was very pleased, very overjoyed to have his name forwarded to the Governor General for transmission to the Lord Chancellor, as it was done in those days. He did a lot of free work for people. Not only that, people who came to him for free work, he had to give them money to go home and to buy lunch in town. I'm quite sure that there are many persons at the bar who still do that. I want to just talk a little about Pierre and myself. Because we were in politics, we kept in touch, in political activism, we kept in touch with each other from time to time. I remember on one occasion, my lord, ladies, I had to be in London. I was lecturing at Cavell at the time. And I went to London in the summer period for 3 months. I had to do something, so I rented a one-bedroom apartment. And Parnel came from Cambridge to see me. We used to go back up, but you know, both of us, we talking, we liming, we eating, until the time went by for the train. So I said, well, all you have to do is sleep with me tonight. Don't get too excited. I gave him my bed, and I slept on the couch. As I said elsewhere, he returned the favor to me of sorts. A few years later, in September 1981, remember it? There was a match at South Rivers, a cricket match for lawyers. I wasn't to play. So I rode a bicycle from Connery and go up to South Rivers to see the game. I had on a white shirt and jeans and sneakers. But not unusual, the lawyers were one short. So I was drafted. And prepared as always, Parnel had an extra pair of pants. He said, well, Ralph, you have to play. And he gave me his trousers. And afterwards I washed it and took it back to him. He said, nah, man, you got to keep that. You don't wear it already. No. As some may suspect, he was a tower of strength for me during the last 20 years. I could call on him, and Julie would know this, any hour of the day or night to give me advice. And I could always trust his honest judgment and views. And of course, he paid close attention to what I was doing, and very often called me, gave unsolicited advice, but I always welcomed his advice. And I would really miss him. Tell you that honestly, from the bottom of my heart. During the time when we had intense political competition, he said some awful things about me, and I said about him. And I know that with the passage of time, all that is water under the bridge, and neither of us remained wedded to the vanity of small differences. And I can tell you, he was my true friend. And he knows, he knew all along but I am his reliable friend. He, you know, at times like these, I always remember Pericles' funeral oration, as narrated to posterity by Thucydides, the ancient Greek historian. You know, when a man is alive, he has a lot of rivals and detractors. But when he's gone, when he's out of the way, he receives honor and goodwill, unalloyed. That's not my word. Those are not my words, they're Thucydides. You know, we are inscribing not a commemoration in marble or stone. There dwells in this country today, and I believe will dwell for generations to come, on unwritten memorial of Parnel Campbell. Graven, as I've said, not on stone, but in the hearts of men and women of this St. Vincent and the Grenadines and this Caribbean which he loved. Permit me, my Lord, ladies, colleagues, to end by quoting Invictus, the poem 1875 written by William Ernest Henry. And I'm quoting it because it was made very popular by Nelson Mandela. And they helped him while he was in prison. And I know that Mandela was a guiding light for Parnel. Called one of his daughters Mandela, but it dwells. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the honor of the shade. And yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. My dear friend Parnel, servant of the people, you would be remembered by me as an unconquerable soul. I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gonsalves.
May I be excused, my lords, ladies?
Yes, thank you.
I have, as you know, I have Parliament today.
Yes, we understand. I invite our next speaker to address us via Zoom. Justice of Appeal, Madam Justice of Appeal Gertrude Thom of the Eastern Caribbean Court of Appeal.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I am indeed grateful for this opportunity to join the legal fraternity in paying tribute to the late Parnel Campbell, Queen's Counsel. I first met Mr. Campbell many years ago in the 1990s at a regional seminar in St. Kitts. He arrived a bit late due to his flight being delayed. To me, he seemed quite flustered. I inquired of Justice Duke Pollard of the CCJ, now retired, who was seated next to me. Who was that gentleman? Justice Pollard responded very proudly, "That is P.R. Campbell, an absolutely brilliant man." I would soon concur. It was not long after it was Mr. Campbell's turn to present the position of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. He presented arguments on several areas of the constitutionality of the proposed extradition treaty which was being discussed, points that were not raised by anyone else. Approximately 45 minutes later, Mr. Campbell was still on his feet speaking, unscripted. One of my colleagues whispered, "The chairman has to remind Parnel, this is a one-day meeting." Mr. Campbell was a great orator. Mr. Campbell had an incredible legal mind. He was always willing and ready to assist the court. He was always respectful to the court, even when he did not share the same view as expressed by the court. I cannot recall ever seeing Mr. Campbell angry. He was a legal luminary who enjoyed the respect of his colleagues throughout the region. He was held in very high esteem. His submissions were always meticulously researched and very well reasoned. Mr. Campbell's legal scholarship and his many contributions to the development of the jurisprudence in this region is recorded in many of the judgments of this court. Mr. Campbell was a very generous person, always willing to share textbooks from his library with the court. I can recall for many years, I borrowed his Blackstone on civil procedure on Wednesdays, and I would return it to him on Mondays. After a while, it dawned on me that I was really lending Mr. Campbell his own Blackstone for a mere 2 days per week. But being the gentleman that Mr. Campbell was, he never sought to retrieve it earlier. When Mr. Campbell was not discussing law, I found his two favorite subjects were his faith and his family. He loved to speak about his faith in God. He always spoke lovingly of his family. He had a great sense of humor. But it was only recently that I learned of the talented King Jaja. I spoke with Mr. Campbell a few months ago, and he was in his usual jovial mood. At the commencement of the volcanic activities, I inquired of him through his daughter Mandela and was told of the excellent preparations he had made for his family. I thought to myself, nothing has changed. Mr. Campbell is always well prepared. I was therefore surprised and very saddened when only a few weeks later, I learned of his passing. St. Vincent and the Grenadines has lost an outstanding son, the legal fraternity, an outstanding lawyer, the court, one of its distinguished Queen's Counsel, and I have lost a friend. To his dear wife, children, and family, I extend deepest condolences as you mourn your loss. I pray that God will comfort you and give you strength as you mourn. May his soul rest in peace and rise in glory at the coming of Christ. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justice Storm. On the order of proceedings, the next address that I have listed will come from the Honorable Joundy Martin, Attorney General. Mr. Martin here. I don't see Mr. Martin before me, but we have many persons who are attending virtually. It may be that he is among them. All right, well, without anything from the Honorable Attorney General,
Please, my lord. I've just been informed that the Honorable John Martin was unwell yesterday, and he tried his best, but unfortunately he wasn't able to make it this morning. My apologies, my lord.
thank you very much, Ms. Baptiste. I hope that Mr. Martin recovers fully and speedily.
Yes, please, my lord.
We will move along to the addresses from the inner bar. And firstly hear from Dr. Henry Browne, Queen's Counsel.
Thank you, Michael. Honorable Justices of the Appeal, my lords, members of the inner bar, and colleagues of the outer bar. Given the lineup of speakers which I see from the program I was given, I will be mercifully brief. My lords, when asked to pay a short tribute to the learned Parnel Campbell Queen's Counsel, instinctively I said yes. Parnel and I became fast friends in 1973 when we both attended at the Campbell campus. University of the West Indies, Barbados. The opportunity to speak to the attributes of such an honorable man is one of honor. It is not difficult to pay high tribute to Parnel, a most remarkable man, given his accomplishments, which are all worthy of recognition and thanks. The learned Parnel Campbell, one of Her Majesty's council, was an honest and decent man. He exemplified and practiced a keen sense of justice. His passion for fair play and goodwill for and towards the little man were all noteworthy. He looked out for the small man. He sought to make the small man visible as an individual, and together, collectively, as a people. In essence, this distinguished gentleman was that human being who looked out for those less fortunate than himself. Parnel's urge to promote and appreciate a Caribbean civilization was a fillip in his endeavor to forge the Caribbean man within the context of our original African makeup. This is always a good thing. It is always good to know and appreciate one's origins. Such appreciation cannot but inform where we go and how we develop, ultimately, as a people. The Honorable Gentleman Parnel lent his wisdom and legal scholarship to all those who solicited same. This he did in his capacity as a lawyer at the Outer Bar, as Attorney General of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and in time as a member of the Inner Bar. This should not be surprising, for long before he was appointed the Attorney General of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, he gave of himself in the public space in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. From there, he championed the cause of the little man in their name, for and to their benefit. He pursued justice in all its forms for the unfortunate. His concerns, support, and advancement of little man, who was too often passed by on the other side, was one of his steadfast passions. He essayed to make the otherwise invisible man visible. At the University of the West Indies, in Barbados, and at the New Wooding Law School, Trinidad and Tobago, Parnel was a leader in sundry ways. He brought the intelligence of his chiseled mind to bear on the many student problems which beguile us. Level-headedness, humility, and generosity were attributes of his greatness. Alas, however, he is no longer with us, because death, a necessary end, must come when it will come. Death, however it comes about, will always be with us. It travels and brings with it its sadness. Today we are sad. To his many friends and acquaintances, I bring the deepest condolences on the passing of Parnel. More particularly, I bring condolences to his surviving wife and children. I pray upon you all God's consoling hands. Be assured, however, that as time rolls, your tears will no longer flow. Your tears would give way to a quiet smile as you reflect on Parnel's marvelous and significant life. In time, you will sum up his life's work and contributions to humanity in the simple but profound fact that as husband, father, and as a people's person, his life was not in vain. Parnel is gone to the ages, but let's all take solace in the fact that given the way he lived on earth, in eternity, he will be near to where he can touch the face of God. And all the promises, therefore, as the soul of my dear departed friend, the Honorable Parnel Campbell, CVO, Queen's Counsel, may he rest in eternal peace as flights of angels sing him to his rest. May it please you, my lords.
Thank you very much, Dr. Browne. Our next speaker from the inner bar will be Mr. Francis Alexis, Queen's Counsel.
May it please your Lordship, your Ladyship, I join in paying tribute to Parnel Campbell. When the Faculty of Law started at Cave Barbados, there was some uncertainty as to what would happen. Parnel Campbell was one of the students who gave a sense of assurance to the faculty, even as a student. He had come from studying years before in Canada, and he brought to Cave Hill that sense of quest for knowledge, and he was an inspiration to his colleagues as students. He gave the faculty as a student direction and confidence in ourselves. None of us then was surprised. All of us expected that he ended up with a first class from the faculty as one of the first batch of students from the UWI Law faculty. As a matter of fact, not only did he get a first class from the faculty, but he got the first of the 4 first-class students. On his way to Cambridge, he encouraged me to stay at the faculty and help, so I'm indebted to him for that. Parnel Campbell has one of the most incisive legal minds one would find. A former public officer in St. Vincent and Grenadines considered that he had a complaint against the state to the way his services were ended. Parnel Campbell is the Attorney General. He's appearing in court, and he's cutting through the frills and getting straight to the point. And he says to the court, in effect, no matter what the applicant is saying, fact is that he's out of court, out of time. The court is presided over by Sir Dennis Byron, and the court is agreeing with him. Now, my lord, that case is used by the UWI Faculty of Law in its advanced administrative law at the LLM program to illustrate to the master's students in the faculty what an incisive legal mind is, how you get to the point and not be distracted by frills. So I am happy to say that we in the faculty did not have to wait until his passing. Every time, every semester we teach the course, we put his picture up on the blackboard to show students from around the world what a brilliant legal mind looks like and how he operates. He had come over to Grenada in another case now, and I'm appearing against him. I could see, as it were yesterday, we're standing in the courtyard, and he's taking a certain point. As I said, he's against me. And when he articulated the point, I figured I better not try any bluff. I better just surrender one time. But you know, the next thing he turned and said was, however, what are you all looking for? And we spoke. That shows that he was a man with humanity, and he knew how to temper justice with mercy. He had a way with words. If you, my lord, listen to his calypso, those two calypsos which Madam Justice Thom referred to, every single word in the lyrics commands attention. Now, I'm paying particular attention to those calypsos because those two calypsos had the effect of dethroning me as Calypso King at Cave Hill. So I paid very close attention to them, and I have to tell you that I hope those calypsos will go down in eternity as, again, examples to how we can mesh lyrics with harmony and yet be sending messages. Now, one of those calypsos was dealing with Grenada, and it is very interesting. He is singing about 1973 or thereabouts, and he is talking about revolution in Grenada, so he was a prophet. We heard earlier this morning that he did not believe in revolution in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but he could have foreseen revolution in Grenada because of what was happening at the time. So again, we commend that Calypso bandit to all and sundry. We here in Grenada, all my colleagues in Grenada, recognize in Parnel Campbell brilliance of intellect legally. And we take this opportunity to extend to his family and friends and our colleagues in St. Vincent and the Grenadines our most profound empathies. We pray that God will give guidance to his surviving family and that God will let him rest in peace. Much obliged, my lords, my ladies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alexis, Queen's Counsel. And again, from the inner bar, we will next hear from Mr. Clement Lashley, Queen's Counsel.
Can I be heard?
Yes, Mr. Lashley, you can be heard.
Yes.
Yes, Queen's Counsel, you may proceed.
Mr. President, Justices, I have the greatest honor to present this tribute on behalf of our Governor General, Dame Sandra Brunella Mason, Norma Monica Ford, Richard Beyer, and myself, who are the surviving members of that first group of students from Barbados who are part of the pioneers, or the guinea pigs, as we were popularly called, of the early Faculty of Law following its inception in the year 1970, some 51 years ago. I say that I make this speech not without a measure of humility on behalf of my most distinguished and erudite colleagues. It was certainly with much trepidation that the first batch of law students coming from all over the Caribbean entered that faculty on the Hill as it then was. We were then looked at grudgingly by other faculties as those law persons on the Hill, and probably different from the other faculties. This trepidation was realized when the late Professor Ralph Carnegie, on day one, delivered his first lecture in constitutional law, which most of us did not understand, and consequently, we all flocked to the main library to seek to ascertain from the books what the professor was really talking about. I well recall the case the professor cited in that first lecture, Mazim Bamuto versus Ladnaberg and George, 1969, 1 AC 645, which caused some stir. The issue was to do with the doctrine of legislative sovereignty of the United Kingdom Parliament vis-a-vis the colony of Southern Rhodesia, as it then was. I remember distinctly our departed colleague Parnel was there with his usual impressive and erudite posture, participating in this exploration. But it was people like Parnel who, with discipline and fortitude, and with his exemplary conduct, inspired those of us who came in contact with him. All the lectures were dedicated and quite brilliant. I remember the likes of Professor Ralph Carnegie, Edward Lang, and Anthony Bland. Rumors quickly spread that the faculty only intended to pass a certain percentage of students. More trepidation continued, but Parnell ensured that he would have been among that group given his dedication and commitment. It was during the third year in a family law lecture that Dean Keith Patchett looked at the class and reminded us that, you know, you all will be the future leaders. Persons like Campbell, by then, demonstrated his leadership potential and his political ambitions. He was therefore go down in the history books of St. Vincent and the Grenadines as the gigantic historical figure, a man larger than life, composed of bigger and simpler elements than ordinary men. It is therefore not surprising, and the words of Keith Patchett were providential, that Parnell distinguished himself as one of the top students of that first batch, gaining first-class honors in his LLB degree, and therefore he has set a record at the faculty, which record is etched in the history of the faculty. It was in 1998 when the faculty celebrated its 25th anniversary of the first graduates of the said faculty with a dinner at the Barbados Hilton Hotel on the 26th September 1998, and on the following Sunday, the 27th, at a church service at the St. Michael's and All Angels Cathedral. Parnel was there, and he delivered a speech that Saturday night on behalf of Professor Ralph Carnegie, much to the satisfaction of all present, including the then Governor General of Barbados, Sir Clifford Husbands and Lady Husbands, the Chief Justice Sir Dennis Williams and Lady Williams, Attorney General Sir David Simmons QC and Lady Simmons. The name Parnel Randolph Campbell lives on, bearing in mind his remarkable achievements as a student in the faculty and thereafter as a lecturer in the said faculty. From the time he set foot back in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, after the end of his distinguished performance both at the Faculty of Law and the Law School, he walked the corridors of power in that island until his passing. When I informed our former Chief Justice, Sir David Simmons, of Parnell's passing and that I was making this contribution, he immediately undertook to join me in placing on record his admiration for this gentleman. This is what Sir David said. I met Parnel R. Campbell during the years 1970 to 1973 when he was an undergraduate in the Faculty of Law at Cable campus of UWI. I had the very good fortune in that period to conduct tutorials in legal methods and criminal law. It was then I soon came to have the greatest admiration for the precocious intellectual talent of Parnell, and it was very evident that he was destined for the academic distinction that he ultimately achieved. 25 years later, when we served as Attorney General of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Barbados respectively, I can assert that his thoughtful and elegant contributions adorned regional meetings and were compelling. The Commonwealth Caribbean has lost a legal scholar of towering proportions. I therefore at this time, on behalf of my colleagues, respectfully recite from Lord Tennyson this poem, Crossing the Bar, which we are sure Parnell, wherever he is, will approve. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call to me, and may there be no moaning of the bar when I put out to sea. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. Twilight and evening bell, and after that, the dark. And may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. For though from out or born of time and place, the flood may bear me far, I hope to see my pilot face to face when I cross the bar. As I conclude this tribute to Parnell, I am again reminded of the words of Thomas Wolfe, you can't go home again. I say that Parnell has left the life he has lived for the past 75 years for greater life. He has lost the earth he knew for greater knowing. He has lost the life he has for greater life. He has left the family and friends he loved for greater loving, so as to find the land more kind than home, more large than earth. I say also the power has blessed him, so sure it still will lead him on. To his soaring wife and children, we say that though his passing will leave a void, they may look beyond this hour the beauty of love which endures forever. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Lashley.
I'm advised you, sir.
And our final speaker from the inner bar, Mr. Stanley John, Queen's Counsel.
I am much obliged, Lord, lady, justices, his spirit. I immediately started to reflect on how devastating this unwelcome event must have been for his widow, Judy, and their children, for his brothers and sisters, and indeed his entire family circle. Pia and I first encountered each other at the grammar school in the late 1960s. He gave me a few years. I remember distinctly his return from studying in Canada when he joined the faculty. And he was a very outstanding member of the faculty and beyond the school environs. We shared one of his first political platforms, I think. It concerned his suspension, together with John Cato and Kerwin Morris, in the throes of the so-called Black Power events of the late 1960s. He was suspended from teaching for his involvement, and he undertook to demonstrate his protests by a march around the grammar school lawn, which ended with him on a chair addressing the students who had gathered. But before that, a young precocious student, well, not young, but a precocious student in the 5th form, not even in the 6th form, called Stalky John, was by his side. And after he had spoken and addressed the gathering, the students wanted to hear from this precocious student, Stalky John. And that was my initiation into the world of political activism. We met again, went off to UWI, studied law, which was precipitated because of his suspension. I was in London, completing the bar finals, and he came up to Cambridge to do the PhD. He did a lot of research at the British Museum. And my digs in central London, just a few minutes walk from the British Museum, became his base in London. And his flat in Cambridge, which was not only bedecked by the charm of his lovely young wife at the time, Julie, but also provide ample delicacies from the kitchen, culinary delicacies from St. Vincent. So on weekends, when we were not in Cambridge, we were in London. We completed the bar finals just about the same time. I think I may have done so 1 or 2 terms before he did, because he was focusing on the PhD. And our association and relationship and fraternal bonds were forged as a result of the experiences we shared in those formative periods. But when I received news of PR, notwithstanding that over the years our relationship have span not only the law, politics, etc. My grief was channeled, as I indicated, in the perspective or from the perspective of how his passing impacted his family. Because the groundings that we had, our fraternal relationship, was anchored primarily on our careers and on our family, but especially on our family relationship. Now, deeply shared proximity is never lost. And in the agony of the pain that follows the passing of a loved one or family member, close acquaintance, the intimacy rushes to the surface of our consciousness, and we are humbled and puzzled by the profundity of the mysteries and yet the simplicity of life. Such was the horror which impacted my communications with Pierre's widow, as I expressed the hope of my family that as she mourns with their family the passing of their lamented spouse and father, that she and her children, or gifted children, may continue to find comfort in the blessings of God's love and the grace, and in the fond memories of the sincerity, warmth, fellowship, and devotion which their family shared with him during his lifetime. I take this opportunity to reiterate those heartfelt sentiments for the benefit of his bereaved daughters, Denise, Arusha, Alpha, whom I fondly call Anchuria. That's her other name. Not many folks will know that, but I always refer to her as Anchuria. And also to those two impressive young men that your father assured spoke highly of, just as he spoke highly and warmly of his daughters, Bantu and Daniel. You have all done your father proud. Throughout this time of grief, one was compelled to reflect on the transient but oft-times checkered character of our sojourn in the mortal realm of man's life. And in doing so, recall some sagacious words which I heard spoken by an aging cowboy character from all places in a classic Western. Character was played by Robert Duvall. The movie is called Broken Trail. And at the graveside of another character, Duvall spoke these words, which one found to be most impressive and instructive. He said, "We are all travelers in this world. From the sweet grass to the packing house, birth till death, we travel between the eternities." That observation caused one to ponder on the miracle of birth, by which we enter into this world coming from somewhere that is timeless and uncertain. And however brief or extended our lifetimes, each one of us journey to the same inevitable point. Our earthly destination is marked inexorably by the mystery of death. And through that, we are transported back to that same eternity from which we came. Thankfully, those who during life's travels come to know and accept the Savior's promise believe death to be a portal to eternity. I am reliably informed that PR was a member of that redemptive class. His life, his service, his preoccupations, especially in the latter years, leave one certain that he will find redemption. But along the way, our travels here on earth, and nowadays we do it in space as well, are marked by various signposts, circumstances, and encounters which bring into focus that other sagacious observation by the renowned writer Robert Louis Stevenson. Stevenson wrote, "We are all travelers in the wilderness of this world, and the best we can find in our travels is an honest friend." I have no doubt that throughout his travels in the wilderness of civic life, professional endeavors, and his outstanding exploits and achievements in public life, PR always had the best. He found that honest friend, a partner, a helpmate, and a counsel right there in the bosom of his lovely and adoring wife. Whatever the vicissitudes of life's changing times may have brought, whether troubles or joy, your love, your admiration and devotion have been enduring and steadfast, unshakable, a pillar of strength to your dear PR. I can attest in some small measure to the inestimable value he placed on your love and devotion. Since his untimely passing, a great many glowing tributes have been spoken about PR's exceptional contributions to civic life, to his profession, and to the public affairs of our native land. I endorse and concur with all the remarkably positive reflections that have been made, that were made this morning, and will continue to be made. They are all deserving of his prodigious legacy. PR never wasted time. He was always committed to exacting performances, the exacting performances for which his memory is now being acclaimed and celebrated. He was a legend in his time. He will be greatly missed at various levels in this country and beyond, as evidence from the testimonies that we have had the benefit of hearing from colleagues in the course of this sitting this morning. Maureen, my wife, and our family join me in extending our deepest condolences to you, Julie, and to your family at this somber time in your lives. And we hope that you and your children continue to rise and blossom as your departed patriot would want you to continue. Mandy, Cheryl, and the dedicated staff at the Lord Chambers of PR, Campbell and Company, be assured of the support and goodwill of Akin and I and the staff at Elizabeth Lord Chambers as you face the challenges and make the adjustments that will be demanded as you work to continue the stellar practice that is PR's legacy over the coming months and years. The bench and his colleagues at the bar alike, as you've heard, will miss his eloquence and erudition. He was an esteemed senior, and so will the viewing public, scores of whom have been loyal followers of SVG TV, The Law and You. My lords, ladies, as we mourn the passing of this distinguished colleague, we are comforted in the belief that belief that he accepted the sacred promise. And I pray that we affirm our faith in the fitting words of a notable 19th century lawyer and orator, even though they may have come from an agnostic. Do permit me, in closing, to paraphrase briefly the words of Robert Ingersoll, who at the graveside of his fallen friend declared as follows, as we will see in law. For if the grave ends all, if all that was our friend is dead, then the world is better for the life he lived. Beyond the grave we cannot see. We listen, but from the lips of mystery there comes no word. Darkness and silence brooding over all. And yet, because we love, we hope. For our faith teaches us that above all and over all, there is God who loves the right. Beyond the veil, beyond the night called death, there is another world to which men do carry all the failures and the triumphs of this life. Hence, an honest man has naught to fear. For in the life hereafter, sincerity is virtue, fidelity is loved, and courage honored. So all is well with the dear husband, father, son, brother, friend, and colleague whom we have lost. And because we love, because we believe in our Messiah's promise, we hope to meet again. So farewell, yeah. Farewell, my brother. Yet again, farewell. I'm much obliged to you. Thank you.
Our next address will come from the Learned Director of Public Prosecutions, Ms. Sejilla McDowall.
Good morning to everyone. May it please this honorable court and honorable justices locally and abroad, members of the inner bar, there is at least a duo of the inner bar in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and members of the inner bar abroad, members of the outer bar locally and abroad, and all distinguished attendees. Special regard to the family of the late PR Campbell QC, wife, children, close relatives, the staff of PR Campbell Chambers. I pray God's strength and his love to all those who are touched by the life and times of the late Parnel Campbell QC. I do so personally and on behalf of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, National Prosecution Service of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I am not his contemporary, but like many others, many persons of relative youth, as I would describe myself, we are impressed with the heritage that is and that remains long after his passing. Today, there is already a symphony of tributes. My words will form part of the swelling sound that will echo in the wells of this court and well beyond. That a hero walked, he worked, he lived amongst us. These will not be sad and discordant keys, but we will join in the chorus that he was indeed a true gentleman. There will be countless verses well beyond today that give an account of the mettle of this man who housed the giftings of a Calypsonian, politician, nation builder, Christian, legal giant, historian, academic, social activist, and commentator, entrepreneur, mentor, boss, teacher, husband, father, grandfather, godfather. It is a song that will never end because his legacy outlasts his mortal body. Generations well after me, well after us, will know this name. Mr. Campbell QC impressed me as a man with a healthy obsession for law, order, and discipline. He was careful about the observance of protocols, practices, precepts. And I remember well the first time that I had sight of his office when I visited his chambers at the invite of my friend Mandela. We would have had several meetings of Advocates SPG, a Christian group. We had evening devotions at his chambers. And the first time I encountered his office, it impressed me as a museum. An amazing consortium of papers and books. I've never seen so much newspapers in one place. It was an archive built through the years by hands I don't know, his hands, and I felt I understood him from just observing that. I understood him a bit more by this discovery, that his need for knowledge was as instinctive as the need for air. I could imagine if it were possible that he would petition for leave to be at this very sitting. It's almost like if I'm expecting that he would walk through these doors. I will not run. I will not run. I know that he, and all of us can attest to his well-timed and perfectly poised presentations injected with good-natured humor. But the Lord God, in his wisdom, knowing the QC's propensity to serial his presentations, would urge him to just rest instead. And indeed, he is resting now after a period of illness. He is now observing the protocol of the highest office where he is right now. I can't imagine that he will not be obliged to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. In constitutional utopia, Mr. Parnel Campbell QC, he is not knighted by the Queen, as esteemed as she is, but he is bestowed the highest order of a fully democratic, completely emancipated, fully reformed St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We can do that now, and we are doing so in recognition of his selfless contributions to this nation. He has transected many social lines. We can only imagine the persons that he has touched, positively affecting lives locally and in many distant lands. Heroes walk amongst us. They laugh and they cry with us. They walk and they toil for us. They sacrifice more so that we can gain even more. His success was not trial and error. It is ordained, this is my belief, by God who walked with him. Heroes walk amongst us. They never leave us. That's my belief. And as I close, I remember when Mr. Parnel Campbell Cvo QC spoke. I remember when Mandela would have brought the news, like many others, I was troubled. I couldn't sleep. But the first set of things that came to mind was the way he spoke. He was the director in the way that he spoke, and the words in obedience followed his lead like an orchestra. He was careful with his words. There was a mastery of this artistry that will be missed. Beyond his words, he was a distinguished gentleman by his conduct. Beyond his social graces, he was in touch with the human spirit and understood the value of the persons he served and he loved. I could still hear him say endearingly, Sejilla, and no one else called me that by name. So, should I hear that name today, I might run. He was never demeaning, always courteous and encouraging. He critiqued without being eternally caustic, without disparaging the human soul. That's just an example of the good in this man. To his nearest and to his dearest. Some of us we see today, others may be shedding a tear wherever they are right now. I say this, we all hope in this life to have our feet firmly planted to the ground. But when difficult circumstances, especially death, brings us to our knees, just pray. Because precious in the eyes of the Lord is the death of his saints. So may Parnel Randolph Campbell, Cvo, QC, Vincentian extraordinaire, continue to rest in eternal peace. Amen.
We will next hear from the President of the Bar Association, but before I invite Ms. René Baptiste to address us, let me again thank the Learned Director of Public Prosecutions for her address. Ms. Baptiste?
May it please my Lord, my ladies, justices of the High Court, other members of the bench who may be viewing these proceedings via Zoom, members of the Inner Bar, the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, members of the Outer Bar. The passing of Parnel Randolph Campbell has left a gaping hole in the Vincentian society, and more particularly so at our Inner Bar. Parnel Randolph Campbell is a household name in his native St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Like my learned senior, Mr. Stanley John, my colleague, Mrs. Bacchus-Baptiste. We knew him when he burst on the local social and political scene in the 1970s, more particularly 1969 for two of us, as he was then our form master. Struck this figure a tall man in the whitest of shirts coming through the doorway at the old grammar school building where we sat as a group of just about maybe 20 students in the first co-ed class of this Form 6B. We walked in, and as very obedient students, we all rose and sat down. He introduced himself. He was an excellent form master. I think everybody in the class liked Mr. Campbell. On the other side of the coin, on the political scene, he was a member of the Educational Forum of the People, sporting a dashiki and sandals. He was among those young black intellectuals that had returned from university. He was referred to then by the political powers as a black power boy that wrote and spoke about black power. And as usual, it was not the most welcome of changes at that time. But the young ones, we lapped up black pride, black knowledge, black power. They held class in the market square with a sprinkling of persons, some out of general interest, others out of curiosity, and yes, others just to mock the young progressives. In 1968, the Sir George Williams University affair emerged in Montreal, Canada, and it caused some of our Vincentians to seek shelter wherever they could from being arrested, and other Caribbean colleagues who were arrested to flee back to the Caribbean before the hearings. Some ended up with a little police record. Meanwhile, as young as teenagers, we were following the lead of these young university graduates, trying to learn about African heritage and the need to challenge the status quo. But as you would have heard from my colleague, the status quo did fight back. At the time, because they lacked that general political persuasiveness, they also enjoyed a certain measure of naivety coming up against the political powers. They wrote their articles, which found fertile ground for the ideas among the next generation, including one Jomo Thomas generation. As a matter of fact, Jomo was manager of sales, and you could find him on Friday mornings at Correa's, moving the newspaper of the young intellectuals. Meanwhile, those of us took up photography, and I see that Bantu has inherited that eye for the photography. See, this program is designed by Bantu Campbell. Take a good look. And I would like to state here now, as you heard our learned DPP indicate, that there's so much paper in Mr. Campbell's chambers. So therefore, I will crave the indulgence of Madam Registrar to permit me to have 7 copies of this program to be launched in the National Archives and the National Public Library, because it is in those places that you will find and hopefully try to find this 50 years from now. And we need to keep the record. We have a weakness in documentation in our part of the history. We were his outstanding class of 69 to 71. He always boasted about it. And when he left to go to the Faculty of Law, we missed our teacher. But we were happy when we heard King Jaja saying to buy your own cigarettes. We know it was not simply just the calypso for the sake of it. You see, smoking was a social symbol and a rite of passage for young people that time. A sort of looking smart, smooth, and sexy. But Mr. Campbell at Cave Hill was such a model student. You would have heard from my senior Alexis QC. It was Francis Alexis, Henry Dyer, Henry Browne, Parnel Campbell. They seem to be leading in making sure that this stone, this true milestone, is placed for the sake of history at the faculty in Barbados, at St. Michael's, so that 50 years later, we could be standing here to pay tribute to Parnel Campbell. He was a tutor in a number of civil law subjects, especially I think it was constitutional law and contract. And as Dr. Alexis said, he was first of the first. Well, that's another milestone. But so few of us here would know that. This is a man of superior intellect, dedication, class, purpose-driven. He loved form and protocol, but he often said, don't let that fool you, the substance has to be there as well. It was between 1987 and 1989, I had the honor of working with him on 2 civil matters. He was so thorough. He didn't believe you should commit anything to memory. When you are preparing, you must write it down. He has left in his chambers and here at our bar a legacy for preparation, incisiveness, excellence, respect for the court, respect for the nobility of the profession. You see, he himself in some of his writings, which have not been published, but the time will come for that, he believed even when you are political enemies, you must still find a way to remain friends. He was an outstanding Attorney General. As you would have heard from the Honorable Rafi Gonsalves, he was among those of the clean sweep in 1989 of governance. And I copied the forward of the 1990 law revision, which he piloted to the House. And he wrote these words, I quote, "The happy circumstance that St. Vincent and the Grenadines has finally accomplished its first successful law revision since 1926. There are few of us that have 1926 volumes. It was an incomplete revision of 1966, the Grey Books, the 1926 for Browne, is attributable principally to 3 factors, he said, for all of which the government and people of this state are genuinely appreciative. And the factors were the British development given the Caribbean, fully funding the services of the Queen's Counsel, who was the Law Revision Commissioner, USID, Caribbean Justice Improvement Project, through the University of the West Indies, and the gratitude of his predecessors. He said, I quote, "I'm personally grateful to my predecessors in office for the foundations they established and upon which I was able to build since May 1987, when the baton was passed to me." This foreword was written by Parnel Randolph Campbell, CVO MP of Gray's Inn, barrister, Attorney General, and Minister of Justice, on his birthday in July 1992. So you should frame this. Very important record. As I close, my Lord, my ladies, I wish to place on record his indelible contribution to the bar, the scholarship of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court practitioners, and I want to throw out this challenge for the new generations to prepare, film, and arrange for the next 1,000 episodes of The Law New. He did it. You see, there is something for dedication, principle, and conviction. Conviction is not just saying the words that everyone would say you have good grasp of the English language. It's actually seeing and doing and performing to carry out the courage of your convictions. So the baton is now firmly going to be passed for others to run the race. I personally like to thank a colleague, Mrs. Mandela Peters, for taking up to do 2 episodes so that she could bring it to 1,000 for the Law and Youth in memory of her dear father. He often mused about this legacy when we sat in the antechamber. It was his greatest wish that this be done and continued by members of the bar of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The time is now. May is halfway through. June could never be too soon. So here is the challenge. Walk the plank. Walk the plank. Secondly, time for the Parnel Campbell Memorial Lecture will come. And I anticipate and hope it will not only be by Zoom, but we will see the hall that is chosen for the inaugural lecture to be extremely full of members of our honorable bar. Remember that he tackled topics that the man on the street, the man about town, wanted to know. He felt he couldn't let them down because sometimes we're called to ask him a question. And this is the time for us to pay real tribute to Mr. Parnel Randolph Campbell by keeping the program going. Mandela will be the lead. You know, he had his political career, the ups and downs. And it was so many of our colleagues entered the political arena by force, getting a defeat, and then reaping the reward of victory. He was one who was molded by both victory and defeat in the political arena. But his greatest political contribution, in my view, is being the chairman of the Constitutional Reform Commission. He has left something which I believe the University of the West Indies, as our colleague Ms. Dr. Alexis has indicated about the LLM in administrative law. Well, in the constitutional law syllabus, some must be made to research the volume of work done by Parnel Randolph Campbell and his commission. But he was the leader. When they talked about the commission, I think they forgot there were 22 other members. They just knew it was Parnel Campbell. To read that work in its entirety and understand what he was trying to do for the generations to come and his commission, to lay the foundation for truly having a Caribbean constitution formed by Caribbean people, informed by Caribbean people, and written for a Caribbean civilization. To Mrs. Julie Campbell, all the members of the family, my colleague Mandela, on behalf of the Bar of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, please accept our deepest condolences. He will be missed. We'll miss seeing his tall figure strutting in, slightly late, just about 1 minute to 9. And we would miss him. His very soft way of speaking when he wants to correct someone. But he did it in love and gently. He didn't have to be persuaded by the arrogance of language. He did it out of the goodness of his heart, that he knew we needed to be corrected and to be put on the right path. We will miss him. This court will miss him. Much obliged, my lord.
Thank you very much, Ms. René Mercedes Baptiste. From the Atabar, our next speaker, Mrs. K. Bacchus-Baptiste.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, my lads, my ladies, colleagues. I rise to pay my tribute to my friend Parnel Randolph Campbell, authoritative, energetic, commanding, significant, indelible, exceptional confidence, dependable, meticulous, thorough. These are just a few words to describe the impactful life of Parnel Randolph Campbell. Our relationship spanned different phases, beginning with student-teacher, student-student, student-tutor, political colleagues, legal colleagues, and of course, a friend. My earliest memory of P.R. Campbell began when I was about 16 years old in sixth form at grammar school at the A-level form. Parnel Campbell taught myself and René and Olin economics and English. He was a very memorable teacher. I do not believe anybody in that sixth form class could forget the impact of Parnel Campbell as a teacher, molding our minds at that level, sixth form level. He was also the founder of the Grammar School Photography Club, which I joined and learned to explore the world of photography. In those days, films had to be developed in a dark room, and prints were made on special paper, hung out to dry on a line afterwards. I can still to this day remember the smell of the developer as you put the prints into it and wait for it to be developed. I see his Lordship is nodding in his head. It's a smell that would remain with me. And then the cutter that we use to cut the prints and hang them out to dry. As I said, he was beloved by his students, especially the females. In fact, we had a name for him, Julie. 4711. That was a special cologne for to serve with love. And when we wanted to speak in code, we would say 4711. But I will not tell of the tales of my friend René and her fondest regards for Parnel. After graduating sixth form, I applied to do law. René, Oling, and myself entered Kville in the second batch of students at UWI. And of course, as you heard, Parnel was among the premier set of students at UWI. There, our relationships returned to student-student relationship. And when Parnel Campbell graduated with a first-class honors in law at Kville campus, they invited him to join his staff. And so he taught me in my final year, and we became again student-tutor relationship. Now, as a student, I remember very well Parnel decided to sing the Calypso and took place in the carnival competition on Kville. I remember also that Joel Pitt was a Calypsonian. I had helped him to write the Calypso and backed him up to be defeated by Parnel singing as King Jaja, Buy Your Own Cigarette, which I heard this week on Facebook, Calypso, Buy Your Own Cigarette. The second one, The Bandit, which I don't recall so well, but Buy Your Own Cigarette has been immortalized. Parnel. He left, I think he taught for a year, and then he went to England to do his PhD in law. I began my early dabbling in politics, opposing the then Labour government around the late 70s, early 80s. In fact, I was part of the founding member of the United People's Movement, UPM, which was a merger of Kenneth John's political party, Democratic Freedom Movement, this is them foolish men, and Carl Duggan's PUC, People's United Congress. So it was a merger of those two parties and ULIMO. whose leaders at that time was the trio Ralph Gonsalves, Adrian Saunders, and Renwick Rose. I remember Zinga's dad was also a founding member, John Horn, of that party. And Pierre Campbell, as was said before, gave up completing his doctorate to come home to be a member of that party. So we became political colleagues and remained so, because he joined the NDP and I later did. And I remember he contested a seat and won and became the Attorney General of St. Vincent and the Grenadines under the NDP. I recall his most trying period when the ULP opposition and Nano accused him of borrowing money from an offshore bank at the time. It was a very, very trying time. And I remember organizing my church, the Healing and Prophetic Ministries, to pray for him. And we led a team of us who actually went into Parliament. And I think we influenced the debate because it was not as devastating as we thought it would be. As I said, we remained political colleagues even though he took a back seat with the New Democratic Party. And I, later on, a front seat, contesting for the New Democratic Party, the Western George seat. And at that time, we had a different relationship because he became my constituent, because he lived in West St. George. And I'm sure he voted for me. As a lawyer, we were opponents, often vying on the opposite side, he for the defendant, I'm for the claimant, and vice versa. But it never really impacted our friendship. We were also both past presidents of the St. Vincent Grenadines Bar Association. I think I succeeded him. It was Nicole, then Pierre, and then myself. I want to commend him, as was mentioned by René before, for his absolute dedication to the Law Anew, the TV program which he did. It is a feat to do almost 1,000 episodes, despite his busy schedule. I would recall many times calling him and engaging him in vigorous debate after some of his commentary. In recent times, when his comments became so pro-government, I would remind him of his Black Power dashiki days and challenging the establishment, and we would agree to disagree. But Pierre was a brilliant lawyer, worthy Queen's Counsel. And I want to say to his wife, Julie, I've known from way back when, we wouldn't say what year, Julie, and his dear children, my colleague Mandela, and his rest of the family. Death does not extinguish the light. It is putting out the lamp because the dawn has come. Lives are like rivers. Eventually they go where they must, not where we want them to. For life and death are one, even as the river and the sea are one. Life is eternal and love is immortal. But death is only a horizon. A horizon is nothing save the limit of our sight. Love is immortal. May he rest in peace.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bacchus-Baptiste. Our next speaker, Mrs. Judith Jones-Morgan, former Attorney General of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
I'm much obliged, my lord, lady, justices, members of the Inner Bar, Queen's Counsel Dr. Henry Browne, Dr. Francis Alexis, Mr. Clement Lashley, and Mr. Stanley John, learned Director of Public Prosecutions, learned President of the Bar Association, members of the Outer Bar, beloved wife, Mrs. Julie Chambers, sorry, Miss I think I'm too nervous to continue. Mrs. Julie Campbell, please forgive me, my Lord. When one is comfortably seated, one sometimes gets so nervous. It's easier when you're standing on your feet and you're facing everybody there. Please forgive me. And other beloved members of the late Parnel Campbell Cvo QC, staff of Messrs. PR Chambers, registrar and staff of the High Court Office, other distinguished invited guests. A pleasant good morning to you all. Though I'm deeply honored to have been invited to present a tribute at this special sit-in, I wish it was under different circumstances. I really wish that Mr. Campbell was sitting there and I was able to present my thanks once again to him. But be that as it may. The Apostle Paul was writing to the Jewish believers in the book of Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, King James Version, about Jesus and the Christian walk. I quote, "Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith." End of quote. You know, I have quoted this scripture because its meaning resonates with me when I think of the late Parnel Campbell QC, the significance of his life, and the lyrics of a popular gospel song by an American songwriter named Steve Green. You know, in his song, he features that particular scriptural text. And having been told by my family and friends that I have no talent for singing, and given the occasion here at the High Court, I cannot sing, but I certainly can speak to the lyrics in a melodic fashion, and therefore I crave the indulgence of the court to just quote a few lines from that song. Find us faithful. We are pilgrims on the journey of the narrow road, and those who've gone before us line the way, cheering on the faithful, encouraging the weary, their lives a stirring testament to God's sustaining grace. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. May the fire of our devotion light their way. May the footprints that we leave lead them to believe, and the lives we live inspire them to obey. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. You know, the songwriter says that we are running the race, not only for the prize, but as those who have gone before us, let us leave to those behind us the heritage of faithfulness. I was blessed to know and work with the amazing Mr. Campbell, an iconic legal luminary, for the first 3 years of my Caribbean legal journey. I give thanks for all he has done for those who were fortunate enough to know and work with him in the public service of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. My tenure as a Crown Counsel in the public service of St. Vincent and the Grenadines began on 17 August 1992 in the distinguished chambers of the then Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Information and Culture, the very Reverend Parnel Campbell, Chancellor and Dean of the Spiritual Baptist Archdiocese. You know, I make particular mention of his spiritual calling because I'm here in New York with my mother and sisters and members of my family who are also members of this faith. For 3 years, 1992 to 1995, I was under his tutelage. My friends, that period is not worth a footnote within his exceptional life. But for me, it was a huge part to the epilogue to my own legal career in the public service. A man of his caliber certainly impacted many lives, and mine is just one of the many. My first 2 weeks were rather routine in nature. Then came the 7th of September, my birthday. Lo and behold, there was a knock on my office door. And as I got up and opened it, there was Mr. Campbell standing outside the door to wish me happy birthday. Well, my friends, I was surprised because I couldn't understand how he had seen that tiny detail on my CV. And my CV might have been, rather cumbersome at the time, but he saw that. It was then I realized that he paid attention to the minutest details about one's life. Not our lives alone, but the cases before him. He was also intensely interested in his staff. Whenever he was away from the office, when he traveled on government business abroad, he would telephone in daily to find out if all was well. And he say no more. I recall that he would assign me to the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions to assist in the criminal assizes. In that office, it was always or frequently short-staffed. I had prepared a case and I thought I had done it well. It concerned domestic violence, and murder, I think, was the charge. But lo and behold, I wasn't successful. When the jury came in late that evening and brought in a verdict of not guilty after all my efforts, I remember walking back up to the chambers. I was quite dejected and almost in tears when I sought him out in his office. Mr. Campbell commiserated with me. You know, my friends, my colleagues, having someone to encourage, motivate, and check on you can make all the difference to your success. And many people will walk in and out of your life, but only the friends, true friends, will leave footprints on your heart. And that is what Eleanor Roosevelt, First Lady, diplomat and human rights activist, said. I agree with her. He was someone whose wisdom, kindness, and unwavering support I could always rely on. I will forever cherish the moments we shared together in the public service. After my first year, Mr. Campbell recommended my promotion to the post of Senior Firm Counsel. That was in October 1993. At that time, during that year, he had started calling me Mojo. I don't know if you know the significance of being called Mojo. You see, I had been pregnant with my first child, Jessie, and Jessie was born in September of that year. You know, shortly before Mr. Campbell left the Ministry of Justice in 1995, I'd also had a second baby, Sonia. So the name Mojo stuck with me. Thankfully, by the time I left public service, he was calling me Jones-Morgan again. There were no more kids at the time. Anyway, the political climate at that time when he was leaving was mired in controversy and conflict. And as he was leaving the AG's chambers for good, I told him that it was also time for me to leave. I was a bit selfish. I told him there would be nobody in the chambers to teach me. Who would teach me anything? He was leaving. He put me sit down and he said, and he stated quite emphatically, Mojo, you must stay. There's a future here for you. Of course, the rest is history. When I think of him then, I think of his intelligence, his laughter, his warmth, and his humanity. All I would add now is that this great intellect expressed itself in a way that has special significance for us today. You see, Mr. Campbell's mind was organized, well-ordered, rational, and tidy. As far as possible, he wanted the law to be the same. I remembered I visited his house once with the then Assistant Secretary at the Ministry of Justice. He was ill and we had to take some documents and papers for him to study. It was an unexpected visit on my part. His young children would have been at school, I think, at the time. But you know, everything was spick and span in that house. There was nothing out of place. No papers, no toys in the middle of the floor, nothing. Nothing like my home. Perhaps you would say Mrs. Campbell might have been the one responsible for the neatness and the tidiness of the home. I rather suspect, though, it was that desire on Mr. Campbell's part to bring order and coherence to the law that flowed through into his home life, his private life. You know, he never raised his voice at the staff. He was always polite to us. It was an intensive 3 years for me, 1992 to 1995, a lifetime of experiences. Working with him was an opportunity to serve and to do so under the mentorship and intelligence of an extraordinary mentor, a maestro, a role model par excellence. He was a tough employer who set high standards and accepted nothing less than excellence. As a boss, I cannot imagine a better role model. He was working on an important employment matter, which involved a prominent service provider in St. Vincent and Grenadines at the time. He engaged my assistance on the matter. He had to travel to Barbados to utilize the UWI library, the Cape Hill campus, for his further research. When he came back, the matter was later settled out of court. He called me into his office to discuss with me how he would have proceeded with the hand of the case if it had gone to trial. We compared our strategies. When I showed him my cases, my friends, the very same cases that he had researched, physically researched in Barbados, I knew I had passed his test with flying colors. I confess to you, as confession is good for the soul, that I had enlisted my husband Desmond Morgan's help in obtaining the said case law from Barbados. What a thing. He was always the consummate professional in the office. His suits were immaculate. His strategies merciless. And though I later worked under 2 attorneys general, the only one I feared and that I couldn't keep up with was Mr. Campbell. He never knew that when I took up the matter on the 30th of March 2001, that my first concern and my only concern was, how was I going to fill the shoes of A.G. Campbell? I stood in my own shoes and I remember quaking with fear, but that is another story. He had an excellent command of the English language and was a master in the use of words, insisting always upon precision of language and particularly so in the art of opinion writing. His opinions are models of clarity and eloquent simplicity. Not even a comma was allowed to be out of place. He was committed to the rule of law. We would do well to pursue his example. He contributed greatly to the cause of justice. Our legislative achievements during my tenure as Attorney General have been shaped by his tremendous input. The Possessory Titles Act, the National Coat of Arms and the National Anthem Regulation Act, the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, the Parliament Bill of 2016. His advice may have influenced the government's decision not to proceed with that bill, not forgetting the constitutional referendum matters, as he was the chairman of the Constitutional Review Commission. Mr. Campbell believed in the public service. In our court sessions and conferences, he was thoroughly prepared for every case, down to the smallest detail. He was a fearless advocate. If the two of us disagreed, it was always in a civil, principled, and respectful way. By his learning, he taught devotion to the law. By his dignity, he taught respect for others and his love for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. By his passion for the revision of the Constitution of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, he taught us to familiarize ourselves with our history, to forge or to create our own noble Caribbean identity. In this regard, he did not fail us, nor did he disappoint us. It was our tremendous loss, in my opinion. He served the court and country with consummate dedication, tirelessness, and a passion for justice. He has left a legacy few could rival. He was the best of the best. The Parnel Campbell I knew in chambers was a kind man, always generous with his time, always willing to listen to others and give advice, sound advice, always interested in other people and their work, always interested in what was going on in our lives, a connoisseur of beauty. When he first saw my daughter, she was 3 months old as a baby, Sonia. He remarked on her beauty. You know, she didn't let him down over the years, and today she's the one, the technician behind the scene here with the computer. I thank her. As we let, I quote, as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. So said Nelson Mandela. You know, when he took silk in around, I think it was 2002, I stand corrected, I was only surprised at the length of time it had taken for this event to happen. This was an extraordinary counsel, a brilliant and insightful lawyer who gave his best and expected the best from each of us, whether in agreement or disagreement. And as outstanding as he was as an Attorney General and Minister of Justice, he was an even better colleague, unfailingly gracious, thoughtful, and civil. As I was finishing my own tenure in the public service, I attended the sitting of the Parliament, whereupon I was told on its conclusion that Mr. Campbell had stormed out of the meeting. Well, it was only whilst I was preparing my notes for this sitting that I found out that Queen's Counsel had done it. Apparently, he had done it on my behalf. As I reflected on his uncharacteristic action, I recall an excerpt from a speech with Dr. Eric Eustace Williams had delivered on the first day of Trinidad and Tobago's independence from Great Britain, the 31st of August, 1962. And I quote, "Democracy finally rests on a higher power than Parliament. It rests on an informed and cultivated and alert public opinion. The members of Parliament are only representatives of the citizens. They cannot represent apathy and indifference. They can only play the part allotted to them if they represent intelligence and public spiritedness." End of quote. I make no further comment on this matter, save as to say Queen's Counsel Campbell had discussed it in some detail. I want to just thank his family for their unwavering kindness and support in that regard. During my tenure as a registrar at the registry, the period of 1st January 1999 to June 2000, I again want to make a confession to you. As registrar of the High Court, I was very partial to the submission of Mr. Campbell's chambers. And perhaps that was born or instilled as a reason of our deep loyalty when we worked with him. But it was something more than that. His documents were always immaculate, excellently presented. It was a just extreme pleasure to touch them and to deal with them. It is a tradition I know that his daughter, Mrs. Mandela Peters, will continue to carry on this stellar practice. His punctuality at court, I jokingly said to him one day, "Senior, you have not changed over the years." He's the only counsel I knew, my friends, who would come to court on time. And if by chance he had forgotten a document, he would telephone his office. And before you could say Jack Robinson, a member of his staff would appear magically with his their document in hand. You know, I know you're getting tired and I'm getting comfortable, but I'm getting there to the end now. Mr. Campbell also ensured that all religious denominations were given equal opportunity to broadcast their worship services on the NBC radio. That's what I was told. I am indebted to my spiritual colleagues, Pastor Steve Phillips and Edison Augustus, Brother F.I. Jack of the Mount Moriah Seventh-day Adventist Church, who shared this testimony with me. The Kingstown District Association of Seventh-day Adventists presented Queen's Counsel Campbell with a plaque, thanking him for his deep interest and commitment to religious liberty, when he was Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Information and Culture. You know, I'm told that Pastor Dick Barron, he's retired now. He's a retired pastor of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventists. He had come to St. Vincent to conduct a revival or crusade. And, you know, he was conducting the broadcast service on the radio, and he hadn't finished his sermon during the allotted time. My Lord and Justices, I don't know if you know this, but when one is caught up in the Spirit, when one is preaching God's word, it's really hard to limit you to time, just as I am doing now. Please forgive me. The Honorable Mr. Campbell was listening. He gave a directive that that Pastor Barron be allowed to finish his sermon, and the other radio programs adjusted accordingly. You know, that is why he was presented with that plaque in 2002 to express the church's deep gratitude for his kindness and generosity as well. But that was not all his interaction with the church. In 1990, Evangelist Roosevelt Daniels came to St. Vincent. And of course, you know, again, in the typical caught up in the spirit, and Mr. Campbell would understand this talk about caught up in the spirit, he was conducting this crusade at Annesville. And I suspect the citizens around couldn't sleep because the noise was way excessive. And so the church members got there on the Friday night, and the SSU turned up in full battalion force and put an end to this noise-racking crusade that was going on. And not only that, on Sabbath, the church members turned up again, you know, in defiance of the SSU and the dictate at the time, and they had to go home. Everybody had to turn back and go home. But it was Mr. Campbell, I'm told, who saved the day of that crusade. A compromise had been arrived at, the excessive noise was reduced, and everyone was happy, and the crusade was allowed to resume on the Sunday night. I am deeply grateful for what Queen's Counsel Parnel Campbell has brought to all of us about life and the Lord. He has made a lasting impression on his staff and the court, and just as he has impressed us, he will inspire many future generations to serve justice and to honor the rule of law. His hallmark were confidence and a superb command over the English language. He was a tireless and resolute champion of justice. He will be remembered for his intelligence and remarkable fortitude. His legacy is one of hard work, dedication, and commitment to the legal profession and its development. St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the wider Caribbean, I dare say the global world, was a better place for him having been in it. To Mrs. Julie Campbell, his beloved wife, to his children, I want to just single out, not that the others aren't important, but Arusha, because she was a little one when I was in working with her dad, Alpha and Mandela, who's now practicing law, and the other lovely children and the grandchildren, his siblings, particularly Mrs. B.T. Marksman and Brennan King, with whom I served in the public service, other relatives, beloved relatives and friends, the staff, his loyal staff of Mrs. P.R. Campbell, and on behalf of my husband, Desmond, my children, thank you. Thank you. Our thoughts and prayers are with you at this time of your bereavement. May he live on in our hearts and the hearts of all those who loved and appreciated him. Thank you for your kind attention. I am obliged. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Judith Jones-Morgan. For our next speaker, I call on Ms. Samantha Robertson.
May it please you, my lords, my ladies, members of the inner bar and outer bar, those here in person and those who join us via Zoom, the family of the late P.R. Campbell, staff of P.R. Campbell and Company, friends, well-wishers. My lord, permit me to adopt most of the sentiments echoed here tribute to Mr. Campbell. It was but 9 months ago we were in the same forum. And Mr. Campbell QC paid tribute to my own father. I know that we are fast growing sect of children who would be joining our club. Who, I'm sorry. Well, I remember after my father would have passed, Mr. Campbell became somewhat of my de facto father. He would call me just because he wanted to know how I was doing and how we were doing. And I would call him just because as well. Mr. Campbell was a father, a husband first, a father, grandfather, father-in-law, reverend, politician. He was something to everyone and everybody. I remembered, and he was a consummate gentleman. In fact, I hardly ever saw him sweat. I remember we were doing a contentious divorce, and we decided we were going to try and see if we could settle the matter amicably. And we went up to chambers of PR, Campbell and Co. And he said, "Man, you lead us in prayer." And we said a prayer and we began the discussions. This is the first time I probably would have seen him sweat. And when I say sweat, I mean sweating bullets. And my client said to me, "I'm going to tell him that's okay, we could call this meeting off." Because it was very contentious, and Miss Bailey could vouch for that. But other than that, he was a man of quiet demeanor, a gentle giant. Make peace, my lord. Lady, I would always remember our Fridays in the antechamber and the banter, and the two Chief Stephen Williams was there, and Paula David. Those would forever be etched in my memory, fond memories. I remember in April sometime, St. Vincent being St. Vincent, I got a phone call, and there's my client on the phone. He says, "I just saw Mr. Parnel Campbell wheeling here in a wheelchair." And I'm like, "Are you sure?" I said, "Okay, I'm not going to call Mandela now. I'm going to give it a day." And I was anxious. I called, I texted Mandela to find out whether or not what I was hearing was actually, in fact, the truth. And she said to me that it was, in fact, true. I stayed in contact with Mandy almost on a daily basis, but I didn't want to overwhelm her because I, too, was anxious. My thoughts were always with him. I used to send my prayers and my hugs, and I hope you gave him them. I was saddened that I wasn't able to see him before he passed. The road is not going to be easy. The odd psalm, a scripture verse, just because a bird, and I know especially for Mandela, like it was for me, and continues to be hard, just not having him next door, just not being able to pick up the telephone and say, "How am I going to figure this out? What is your thoughts?" And that odd moment when you think you're going to push back the chain, go and see him in his office, and there's nothing but an empty chain. Permit me to digress. You know, after the souffle had erupted, I had a chance to speak with Jadrick, and I said, "Jadrick, how are you doing?" And he said that they were fine, and he said, and I, like my sentiments said, actually, "I just wish my dad was here, and I just wish he was here too, and perhaps it would make it all better." Mrs. Campbell, Denise, Arusha, Bantu, Mandela, Alpha, Daniel, thank you for sharing your father with me. May his soul rest in eternal peace. I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Ms. Robertson. The next speaker from the Outer Bar, Mr. Jomo Thomas.
May it please you, my Lord, my ladies, family of Mr. Campbell, and all of the well-wishers. It is an amazing morning, and to come so late into the program when so much has been said about this outstanding man, I don't want to delay those of us who are sitting here and those of us who are listening via Zoom and other platforms. But what I want to say in short is that I have known Pierre Campbell for a very long time. In fact, I grew up in Morris Village, and there was a time when Pierre Campbell and his family lived at Morris Village. And I knew Pierre Campbell for a long time, even longer, before he came Morris Village, because as a young student activist, I was in an organization called the Organization of Unity of Rights and Students. I was a young 14, 15-year-old in Ulimo. I was part of the United People's Movement struggles in '79. And I distinctly remember this amazing man who had such gift in the way he presented and the way he captured the audience that I thought that here was a man who would make an outstanding contribution to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And even in those early times, and when we look at what has happened over those 4 decades since then, he has lived up to everything and more than I thought. So when I came back from the United States, and when I went down to Hugh Whidden and did the Certificate for Legal Education, the CLE, when I returned to St. Vincent, one of the things I wanted to do was either to intern at Saunders and Huggins, where I knew Adrian Saunders very well, but who had gone off by then to higher judicial work, or Pierre Campbell Chambers. I wasn't accepted at either. I am not sure, maybe by then I was writing my plain talk column, and maybe the stridency of some of the things that I said was a little too much for both chambers. And I was saddened that I didn't get into Pierre Campbell's to work at his feet, because Pierre Campbell was such a consummate professional. He was such an amazing technician of the law. And particularly because I detected him as a technician of the law. And an area in which I am so weak, even to this time, after so many years in the law. I am saddened that I did not get the chance to work with him. But Pierre Campbell was the most gracious man I know. I didn't get to work at his chambers, but he decided that he would sponsor my call to the bar. And everything that this man did, if he sent a letter to the registrar, he sent me a copy. He paid the fee, and he sent me a copy of the receipt. And as we got here on that day, he presented me, and ever since then, he has been such a mentor, a brother, because that's his famous introductory word, my brother, my brother. And he has done himself well. He has done St. Vincent well. And I don't want to go over and to traverse all that has been said. Because as a critical critic, I sat here this morning from about 9 o'clock, and I could find nothing that I could criticize about what was said about Pierre Campbell. To his family, I know you're grieving, and many of us who are not close blood are saddened by his loss. But I want you to know that all of us are heartened by his life and his experience. And the great outstanding Vietnamese leader once said, Ho Chi Minh, once said that death is not real when one has done his life work well. Pierre Campbell did his life work exceedingly well. And I want you to take heart from that. My lord, my lady, no oblige.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. And for our next speaker, we will hear from Ms. Raemona Frederick.
Thank you, my lord. Justices of Appeal, Justices of the High Court, members of the Inner Bar, members of the Outer Bar, the family of Pierre Campbell, and the chambers, which really are an extension of his family. Good morning. It has been some time I have had the opportunity of appearing before the court. I did not expect that the next reason to don my robes would be in my quest to pay tribute to Parnel Randolph Campbell of Queen's Counsel, a great man of principle, a man of honor, and a man I'm privileged to have called my mentor. When Mandela reached out to me to address the court, I struggled to distill from the flood of memories that have enveloped me in the weeks after waking up to the news that he had passed. But I endeavor today to celebrate a few of these, certain that in the days to come and in the weeks, I would recall those that I would consider to be more fitting. I had the privilege of meeting QC, as I fondly called him, at an alternative dispute resolution workshop held at the Sunset Shores Hotel in 2001. Shortly before that, I had determined to myself that a degree in communications would be my next academic step. I am uncertain as to what QC saw in my 17-year-old self, but he declared shortly after introducing himself that law should be my chosen path. I'll admit I didn't take him seriously until 2002, when he offered to take me on as a pupil following my graduation from the community college, and I began seriously considering it as an option, albeit at the time ranking lower than my communications focus. However, within a matter of months, the rewarding experience of being a member of his chambers as his pupil resulted in a solitary application to the faculty of law. It has taken me several years to fully appreciate the immeasurable value of this formative year, even before I began the foundational law courses at Cave Hill in 2003. He may not have ever given me a timetable or a course outline, but in keeping with his never-ending quest to educate, I was made subject to the most rigorous pupillage plan each summer and Christmas that I returned home from studies. My entry into the circuit-winning law school in 2006 was made smoother with a solid knowledge of drafting, the civil procedure court rules, and the legal system. His meticulousness has followed me as a quality, a fundamental one in my professional path. I will admit, I was less enamored of his attention to detail when he insisted that if we walked at top speed through Middle Street, we would guarantee timely arrival at the High Court Registry to file, simply because that gentleman had timed it down to 3 minutes from Bonadi's Plaza to the building on Halifax Street. His legal brilliance and eloquent advocacy are undeniable, as spoken of by previous speakers. I to this day remain fascinated by his grasp of the law that extended from him as naturally as a limb. His belief that all should have access to representation went beyond the pioneering of the law and you, a transformative program that for most of its life was filmed actually in his chambers. And I had the occasional task of assisting his main camerawoman and his ever reliable office manager, Mrs. Ethel Raggy. That belief often manifested itself in accepting clients he knew would be unable to afford his fees. There was a moment after my call in which we traveled to the countryside to conduct a visit with a client with a land dispute. As we prepared to leave, our client instructed us to open the trunk of the car, and it was packed with bountiful produce from the lands of St. Vincent and Grenadines. As we drove back to Kingstown, he looked at me as I struggled to contain my curiosity and informed me we had officially been paid our fees. It was, however, his approach to the bench that surpassed all, and it was the lesson that I treasure the greatest. If the court would permit me to share another memory, one that is difficult to recall, but one that speaks to the respect that he had for the court, even in his most challenging times. It was in February 2012, when, on the tail end of an intense 10-day trial, QC felt ill while appearing before the court. The hearings had been confined to chambers due to the unavailability of an open courtroom. The close proximity of the space caused bench and bar to bear witness to what began as an elongated pause and an eventual brief loss of consciousness. The hearing was immediately adjourned, and as we waited for transportation to take him to seek medical, I apologize. And as we waited for the transportation to take him to seek medical attention, he stubbornly refused to shed his silks, and he was only persuaded to do so by her ladyship's insistence that his well-being was greater than his need to adhere to the protocols of the court. And when the time came for him to be assisted from the room, he stubbornly turned and bowed before the court. I dare say that the pain on his face was wrought by his improperly clad state rather than his physical ailment. My lords, his commitment to giving fully of himself was best portrayed in his passion for public service. I was entirely too young to appreciate his tenure as Attorney General and Minister of Justice. Therefore, I counted it a privilege to have borne witness to the level of passion that he gave to the constitutional reform process, beginning with its launch in the early 2000s to its culmination in 2009. Regardless to the variance of public opinion of that pivotal moment in our history, what remains undoubted was that his leadership in the reform process was born from a dedication to nation building, and he once declared that that experience was the pinnacle of his legal career. I can only hope that my commitment to regional public service at the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank does justice to the 10 years I was directly guided by his exemplary wisdom and knowledge. Without those lessons, I would appear before you a lesser counsel, and indeed, I may not have been qualified to appear before you at all. Our country is at a defining period in our history, and it is in these moments that his service to the law and our country are instructive in guiding us forward. My lords, my ladies, I take this moment to express my deepest condolences to his family and his chambers, a stalwart group of individuals who welcomed me into their folds. Know that my heart is burdened at being unable to be present with you and to support each other in our grief. You will be greatly missed. I am obliged, my lord.
Thank you very much, Ms. Frederick. We will next hear from Mrs. Cheryl Bailey. Mrs. Bailey.
My Lord, with leave, I will speak without a mask. May it please you, my Lord, my ladies, esteemed colleagues of the Inner Bar, members of the Outer Bar, the Campbell, King, and Marksman families. My task in paying tribute to learned Queen's Counsel, my senior, is not an easy one for me to undertake. And to be honest, it was a duty that I was not really ready for, as I expected senior to be with us for many more years, or even as a fantasy that senior would have lived forever. But alas, he is no longer with us, and following on from my own father's death some 5 months ago, I rise today with a very heavy and burdened heart. As the penultimate speaker at this solemn occasion, this has meant that the tributes from those who have preceded me have already borne testimony to the many facets of the life of the late Mr. Parnel Randolph Campbell, Commander of the Victorian Order, Queen's Counsel, and with far more knowledge than I, they have recited senior's outstanding achievements with much clarity. Each have attested that he was a man who touched the lives of many of our people, both here and in the diaspora, and he was a man who contributed profoundly to the development of the jurisprudence of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I echo those sentiments wholeheartedly. He certainly was a gentle legal giant, a true son, a nation builder. So on my behalf, and that of my family, both here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the United Kingdom, and that of my co-workers at PR Campbell & Co., whom senior valued and loved, Counsel Macaulay Peters, our legal clerks, Mrs. Ethel Ragay-Stevens, Miss Juliana Marksman, Miss Siobhan Richards, Mrs. Marlene Edwards, Miss Luann Durant, and Miss Alpha McPhee, I take this opportunity today to bid him farewell to the man who I initially called Mr. Campbell. I never in the 25 years called him PR or Parnell, and whom we collectively called boss, senior, sir, and then for me, in short haste of working with him, I called my friend and dad. Before I continue, it would be remiss if I failed to publicly thank Senior for nurturing my personal growth and development as a lawyer. He was my mentor. He did this not only here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but also during my 15 years hiatus when I departed these shores and returned to practice in the United Kingdom. Senior was extremely passionate, my lord, about his beliefs and always courageous in defending them. I admired his mettle. He was fierce, resolute, bold in the pursuit of justice for his clients. We will all be familiar with the saying, I would lay down my life for you. Well, as I stand here before you today, I assure you in Senior's book that this was not just a saying. This was him personified. For most of us, if we were to lay down our lives, we would only do this for loved ones. But Senior laid down his life for clients, both figuratively and literally. I have lots of memories of him doing just this, but one memory in particular fills me with both pride and sheer terror. My pride stems from Senior's commitment to fighting for and preserving our clients' rights whilst putting his own life in danger and jeopardy. And this event that I recall is nothing short of inspiring, gallant, and daring. I bore witness one day to Senior's attempts to prevent a police jeep in which one of our clients had been placed from leaving the Central Police Station. And he did so by throwing himself prostrate to the ground in front of that jeep. A descending Senior challenged and to some extent goaded the police officers to run him over. Senior refused point blank to move until he had received assurances from the police officers that our client would be released. But of course, his protests went unheard and were unsuccessful. As Senior lived for many, many more years, we know that the police didn't run him over. So why would you say, am I filled with terror? The terror that floods the memory is when I think of how differently things could have been that very afternoon. However, quite fortuitously and thankfully, and I know this in my heart of hearts because of the respect that Senior commanded, 4 burly police officers each took a hold of each of his 4 limbs. They lifted him about a foot from off the ground, moved him to the side and out of the path of the police jeep, and then gingerly and gently placed him to the ground out of harm's way, all the while apologizing profusely. What I witnessed that day is what I later described as his stubborn tenacity, as we the English call the bulldog spirit. His clients got 110% value because he gave and put 110% of himself into every case in which he was instructed. As the years roll by, and as we age, somewhat more sensible and judicious, we often spoke about all of the events of that day. As we talked, I would quip that the events were something like out of a John Grisham novel, and in turn, Senior would chuckle, that infectious chuckle of his, and say, Maxine. He never called me by my married name. I've been married for 20 years. But he would say, Maxine, that case will be one for our memoirs. That day was a memorable and defining moment in our professional and personal relationship. My lords, my ladies, Senior was genius. We all know that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, and this, I believed, was one of his guiding principles. In the early days of my practice with Senior, as he never left the office in daylight, there were far too many times when I would beg him to go home or would be forced to inquire the following day about the exact time in which he had left for home the night before. Now, the reason why Senior worked late into the night, and others have attested to this, is because he wanted to ensure that he had a meticulous grip on the facts and a thorough understanding of the legal background applicable to the cases that we were working on. As both Mandela and I can now be found at our computer screens in the early morning hours, it would seem that that mantle has indeed passed to us. He taught us that perfection is the name of the game, that everything needs to be triple-crossed and dotted. Prominent themes amongst the accolades that I have heard since his passing are that Senior was unpretentious, he was down to earth, he was decent, funny, endearing, supportive, and that he never had an unkind word to say about anybody, that he was endlessly kind and considerate. As a colleague from the United Kingdom stated, he was an absolutely wonderful bloke. And as head of chambers, he was always collegial and courteous. He would listen to and consider other points of view. And whilst not always agreeable, he was never afraid to change his mind or bend, but to be honest, he would only do so when he decided it was the right thing to do. Mandela and I would often pull our hair out when we would sit in his office and disagree, of course, politely and respectfully with his point of view. We would try in vain to persuade him to take a different approach, often to no avail. Would this discourage us? Of course not. Instead, both Mandy and I would find our own unique way of working around him, but still fulfilling his ask of us. Oh yes, the master has taught his students well, for we too have a stubborn tenacity. So when it would eventually dawn on him that we had complied with his wishes, but with our own flair, he would just smile at us both with much amusement. As the COVID pandemic took its toll, and in our attempts to shield him from the virus, Senior agreed to limit his attendance in chambers, and this denied both myself and members of staff the opportunity to spend any quality time with him over the past year. Oh, how I and they, I'm sure, will miss that smile, that chuckle, the wit, the banter, and the camaraderie. One of the things, although eloquent, that I admired most about Senior was that he spoke the language of the common man and spoke it with conviction and sincerity. In fact, despite my marriage to a man from the valley, it was Senior who taught me the vernacular of the Vincent dialect and would roar with laughter whenever I anglicized the word. There was simply no airs and graces about him. He told me that one of the reasons for this was that he never forgot his humble beginnings as a boy growing up in Barrowley. Each Saturday morning, sometimes barefooted, he would walk miles across the hills from his home to Layou to collect bread and pastries from his aunt. Due to these humble beginnings, my lord, Senior could dine with kings and sip with paupers, each worthy of his undivided time, affection, and attention. Earlier, I alluded to the fact that I was privileged to call Senior a friend, and more importantly, Dad. When there was no WhatsApp or Skype or Zoom in that bygone age, and the opportunity to frequently speak with my father was nigh on impossible, Senior stepped willingly into the breach and became my father figure. In my father's absence, he guided me, he directed me, and he corrected me. He moved my call in this very courtroom in the year 2000, and when I was to marry a year later, he jested that he and my father should walk me down the aisle. However, as Arusha and Dwayne were to marry a week after me, it was agreed that he did not need a dress rehearsal with my nuptials. I fondly recall my father's last conversation with Senior as we were finishing a family meal at Campbell Ground. There, my father thanked both Senior and Mrs. Campbell for caring for me as one of their own. They embraced each other warmly, and this, in light of everything that's happened in the last 5 months, is the most happy memory of my two dads. Today, Senior has been spoken of as a scholar, a jurist, a mentor. However, some, but not all of us here would be aware that he was an engineer, a tinkerer, an inventor, a man who loved to mend and fix things. Senior was equally as comfortable in his workman clothes as he was in his robes. He could take the simplest thing and turn it into something most spectacular. I recall the day before he took ill. He was busying himself with the installation of water tanks at Campbell Ground, worried that he was not ready to receive a family of evacuees that he had offered his home to as early as the beginning of January. During that telephone call, and at the very moment Lassa Freya erupted, I admonished him, and I asked him to slow down and take things easy. But I know he did not listen to me. He had things to do, and he would have ensured that he finished the task at hand. Senior loved his cricket. He was crazy about his cricket. He could and would talk about cricket until the cows came home. And I don't know if the staff remember, he always treated us to tickets whenever the West Indies were in town. But his true passion was not the law or cricket, or even his tinkering or fixing. His true passion was that he loved his family dearly, and of whom he was immensely proud. He never, ever, in all the years I've known him, ceased to tell me this. Theirs, of course, is the greatest loss, and our deepest sympathies are with you all. But at least as a family, you have the satisfaction of knowing that in his lifetime, Senior was greatly admired by his professional colleagues and genuinely loved by his friends. He was and remains the true embodiment of fairness, humility, integrity, dedication, and professionalism. He was a model lawyer, he was a gentleman, and he showed us all how the job is to be done. Mrs. Campbell, Mom, Denise, Arusha, Alpha, Bantu, Mandela, and Daniel, your husband, your father, will forever be remembered as a great barrister, a man of honor, and all who had the privilege to know him and enjoy his company, a good friend. When a tree that provides shade to its people falls, or when the sun sets and we are besieged by darkness, it is then that a deep sense of sadness grips us. Today we bow our heads in sadness because a great tree has fallen. Senior, sadly, we will not be seeing you next Monday, DV. But as believers in Christ, it is our fervent hope and prayer that we will see you in glory when you and we will rise with the saints on that great triumphant day. I close by reciting those famous words, his words, the words he uttered every single Monday night for the last 25 years. Do have a pleasant week, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and may the good Lord continue to bless us all. My beloved Senior, continue to sleep in eternal peace. You will be missed by all and will remain in our hearts forever. My Lord, my ladies, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bailey. And our final speaker, as listed on the program, will be Mrs. LaKeisha John-Farrell.
May it please you, my Lord, my Lady, members of the inner bar, members of the outer bar, Mrs. Campbell, and the entire Campbell family. Today, I rise to pay tribute to the late Parnel Campbell QC, with whom I had the distinct pleasure of knowing since I was a little girl. The Campbell's family and the Johns family have developed many connections over the years. The most long-standing being that of Mr. Campbell's older son, Bantu, and my older brother, Fitzreuben, who have been friends since prep school and to date remain inseparable. Blood couldn't make them any closer. This friendship was the beginning of many bonds created between the Campbells and the Johns family. Therefore, before my professional career, to me, he was known as Bantu's daddy. I knew him to be very strict and structured, yet always kind to us. When we visited their home, Mr. and Mrs. Campbell would always greet us and make us feel comfortable. But he was strict. No matter what we were doing, once that Nokia cell phone rang and we heard, "Yeah, Daddy," it was always followed by, "Okay, I gone, Daddy ready." No questions asked. Bantu would be on his way to collect his daddy from work. Let us not talk about what I call the Cinderella curfew. Once it was 12, all action was over, so that Bantu can get home by 12:30 sharp. As the party started, it ended for us, because we had to leave, because 1 second later than 12:30, he would have to find that explanation for his father. As I got older, I encountered Mr. Campbell in a professional setting. During our years at Hewarding Law School, Mandela and I, along with other Vincentians attending law school in the year 2009 to 2011, worked together to complete all group assignments. During this time, he provided us with critical feedback on our work and commended us when we did an excellent job. In 2011, Mr. Campbell was one of the speakers in this said courtroom when I was admitted to practice. In addition, I cannot forget when he paused the proceedings at 11:11 a.m. to announce that it was a historic time, being on the 11th of the 11th, 11. He had a great appreciation for the finer details. I recall my first matter on the opposing side. I was extremely nervous, of course, appearing against Queen's Counsel. There was no friendship there in the court business, and it wasn't a time for direct mentoring. Mr. Campbell's pleadings were thorough, well-written, and detailed. As a young practitioner, these are the matters I enjoyed the most, because despite being on the opposing side, it meant that I was required to meet up to the highest standard. Mr. Parnel Campbell, Queen's Counsel's knowledge for the law and explanation were remarkable. Many Vincentians relied on his advice given on the law and you. In fact, on many occasions, I heard persons talking about what Mr. Campbell said on television. I was extremely elated to hear that Mandela is now conducting the program. Mandy, I know your daddy is proud, and I wish you nothing but success with the program. After all, Vincentians will be holding you to your daddy's standard, and they may even shun you of your own identity, so you may expect and be prepared to hear Mr. Campbell's daughter said on TV last night. Mr. Campbell has always been supportive of my legal career. In 2015, when I explored the opportunities to work outside of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I contacted him, and he provided words of guidance, and without hesitating, he arranged for me to obtain a reference letter. When I collected the letter, just by the mere presentation, I probably would have hired myself. It was perhaps that influential, added by his verbal representation, that I can recall my then employer calling to offer me the job immediately. In fact, she said, I just came off the phone with Queen's Counsel, and I decided that I was going to offer you this job now. I will not wait until tomorrow. I would forever be grateful for that, and I always express my gratitude to Mr. Campbell for this. When I was getting married, no doubt Mr. Campbell was invited, and when doing my RSVP checks, he indicated that he was unable to make it. To my great surprise, on my way out of church that New Year's morning, who I saw? Mr. and Mrs. Campbell. After which he greeted me and he said, I had to make every effort to attend this wedding. I do not think I have the words to describe my appreciation for Mr. Campbell. However, to say the least, I consider it a blessing to have known Mr. Campbell, a man who treated me like family and whom I highly respected. May his soul rest in eternal peace. When I spoke with Mandy recently, she spoke about how much she loved her father, and she ensured that she told him this all the time. She advised me to cherish my parents, and I know for us, family is very important. And Mandy, your advice was timely. While we are all occupied in this busy profession, we must remember to take time out for the ones we love. Cherish them. Let them know that we appreciate them. Life is fragile. Our families have always supported each other. And especially in this time of need, I know it goes without saying, but we'll always be there for you. To Mrs. Campbell and the entire Campbell family, on behalf of the Farrells, Ruben John and family, and the entire staff of Denton's Delaney, we wish to extend our sincere condolences and will continue to keep you in our prayers. I'm obliged.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of the addresses for this special sitting in tribute of the late Parnel Campbell Cvo QC. We've heard about his contribution to the society, to the growth, to the development of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We've heard of his contribution to the law in this land. We've heard from those who know, and in my capacity as a former chairman of the Carnival Development Committee, I speak on behalf of the Calypso and the Calypsonians to thank King Jaja for his contribution. There are those two Calypsos which will always live on. You've heard of Buy Your Own Cigarettes, and Revolution Bandits is the official name of the second song. The attendance in this courtroom for this special sitting during these challenging times is an indication of the esteem in which Mr. Campbell is. As we bring today's special sitting to an end, I invite you to rise with me. We will stand and observe 1 minute's silence.
In its special setting, now stands adjourned silently.